Dr. Baxter is here today, and she has a lot to share. Would you like to start with FDA, NIH, or what you're doing with your work in pain?
I think there's
Or are they both the same, really?
yeah,
Right
well, I
now?
think there's a story arc to be had here. And so, of course, a lot of the stats or things I was going to discuss got turned upside down and shaken out yesterday. So I will talk a little bit about where what I'm doing and my interactions with both of them, and then some of the implications that I see, some of the numbers, and I'd love to discuss or whatever format you like to have. So my background was pediatric emergency medicine, did fellowships in child abuse, in emergency pediatrics, did at UT Southwestern a clinical research certificate, and then came back to practice in Atlanta, Georgia, because when you want an academic faculty position, but you also need help with 3 children, then you go back to where your parents are. So when I came back to Atlanta, the database I wanted to work with was at a private practice. And so in order to get access, I had to actually leave academia for the research that I wanted to be doing, which was on procedural sedation, propofol, fentanyl, ketamine, pentabarb, all that kind of stuff. So I did about 10 years of work in procedural sedation with a lot of pain drugs and sedation drugs. And at the time, I didn't have a faculty appointment because of internecine politics with Emory and private practice groups. And so my faculty appointment is in Augusta University, where I am now a full professor as of when they change over in July. So that's exciting. But because of that, I had to get an SBIR when I started wanting to research pain. So instead of getting a normal R01 to look at pain management for vaccines, I had to form a company to get an SBIR. So that was back in 2008, and worked with NICHD. Then people started using the device I made to block using opioids after total knee replacement. So I quit practice in 2016 to work on a device for whatever the biggest opioid problem was, and it turns out that's low back pain. So at this point, I began working with NIDA versus NINDS. Both of them had just gotten the money to do HEAL grants. So what the lore is that Trump went to Francis Collins and said, how much is it going to cost you to solve the opioid crisis? And he said $1 billion. And Trump said, I'll give you $1 billion. You solve the opioid crisis. So from that came the HEAL grants and Help End Addiction Long Term. I think they're not using that acronym so much anymore. But I was one of the first HEAL grants, and we got it through NIDA to develop a device that would reduce low back pain and prevent opioid initiation for those with low back pain. Turns out 25% of people who go for ambulatory care with moderate to severe low back pain are given opioid prescriptions. Even now, it was up to 37%, but it's the #1 cause for writing outpatient non-cancer opioid prescriptions. And the reason I'm giving you all this detail is because I think that it's important to we all realize it, but the time frame of politics is very different from the time frame of science. And so I began doing the background research in 2016 to apply for and get the grant in 2019. There was a 5-year plan that the NIH, a bold plan that the NIH put out in 2020. And one of their predictions was, prediction 31, was that by 2025, they'd be able to reduce the amount of pharmaceutical pain relief with devices and other interventions. So what I started working on in 2016 was part of a bold plan in 2020. And now in 2025, this is the year that hopefully within the next 2 months, the opioid avoidance paper will be published. And not only that, the paper demonstrating that low back pain can actually be reversed when it's chronic mechanical low back pain, can be reversed with a bunch of different specific vibration frequencies. So it's taken a decade to get to the point. We'll probably get de novo by the end of the year. So it's taken a decade to have this idea and need translated into something that can be FDA cleared and approved, and it'll probably take another 2 years for that to translate into disseminated use. So the low back pain part of what we're doing, I can now I'll let you go, Joe, and tell me. And actually, I want one more thing though. So from a regulatory standpoint, when we started with the device to block needle pain, there's another paper that is submitted now that demonstrates that it really is, with a particular frequency of vibration, what you're doing is neuromodulation. So there is a big difference placing the same frequency if you're trying to block needle pain for vaccine. The normal pain for 13-year-olds was 5 out of 10. Putting a vibration device proximal to where it's going, that was 1.88 out of 10. But if you put the same vibration device here, the pain was 0.35 out of 10, with 93% pain reduction and with 84% having zero pain, 13-year-olds getting a Tdap. So says a couple things. Says that this is not distraction, that when you're putting something in multiple dermatomes as opposed to a single dermatome, you get different outcomes, which supports the notion that this is neuromodulatory, that you've got a neurotransmitter which is released in the dorsal horn that's blocking pain. So that start, when we began using it for sharp pain to reduce opioids, and we got FDA clearance for that, it doesn't make any difference in the marketplace, because Medicaid and Medicare won't acknowledge that the mechanism is neuromodulatory. They say it's distraction, so it's a comfort item, so it's excluded from any kind of coverage. So I think that some of the slicing and dicing and blending of all of the different healthcare services make a lot of sense, in that there are certainly barriers between what the NIH believes is good science, what the FDA is willing to consider safe and effective, and then what CMS will pay for. So these things, there are barriers that are intrinsically antithetical to inexpensive healthcare. We made the device, the 200 hertz device for the neuromodulation for acute pain, we made that into devices for post-op pain reduction at $65 a pop. And because they wouldn't be paid for by CMS because they refused to acknowledge it, that's part of why the strategy became, let's go for a high-priced, very highest possible hanging fruit. Let's go for low back pain, and let's go against the $27,000 implantable electrical stem for low back pain. And it was really the regulatory barriers were what caused us to have to go to a very high-priced model to get something to patients, when we would have been perfectly happy if the data had been accepted for lower priced things.
One of my favorite people on earth happens to be on this call, and my go-to expert for anything having to do with CMS and reimbursement. I, of course, am talking about Andre Domino. No, I'm joking. Nikki, will you come off mute? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think that was mean to Andre. That's what I think.
Yeah, a little bit, but we love him. He's our punching bag.
But I am Sicilian, so be careful.
Yes, I know. And I'm on the other coast, so I should be good for now.
I'm only half listening as I'm juggling so many things, but Amy, I picked up on something you said here at the end about, because of these regulatory things, we had to go high priced, and it's funny how sometimes like reimbursement or the regulatory pathway, because we had to do PMA, we had to do $30 million worth of clinical trials, which means we now have to recuperate that, which means we have to charge more. So now we're going to try to get into this higher paying APC or DRG, whether you're inpatient or outpatient. And it's like, what a goofy market that is, that because of this regulatory thing that the government came up with, I now have to charge more. And it's like, it frustrates people that aren't in the med tech world. Like, why is something so expensive? Why is this pedicle screw for, a spine surgery so much money. And it's like, well, let's walk you through. Now, maybe after a certain period of time, that pedicle screw could be $5, but certainly when it begins, what Amy just described and what I deal with on a daily basis, it's like, if I want this product to work, I have to follow this odd game with CMS in order to get put into this payment classification instead of this payment classification. Otherwise, my investors won't get a return and we're dead.
And you're not goofing off on this call. What's your full-time job?
I'm a health economist for Boston Scientific.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I, as a practicing physician was unaware of was just how much orthopedics wags the dog for all medical pricing, because the orthopedic devices and practicing orthopedists and some spine surgeons and some pain docs, but when they're dispensing a device that Medicaid has agreed to pay for at $1,200, they charge a storage fee. So they bill Medicaid for $1,200. The device costs $38. The person that's dispensing the device and fitting it charges $200. And so the orthopedist bills $1,200 and pockets the remainder of that $238 as a storage fee. And not all do this. And it's sort of as one of my friends said, CMS is comfortable with the minor fraud they know, and they don't want to open the doors to greater fraud. But that's the kind of fraud that, because of that, when I finished my because of that, the private practice orthopedist doing this, it doesn't happen in academia, to my knowledge. And so the academic docs, for anybody who's doing a medical device, they're like, okay, well, I'm going to charge $500,000 because I was noble and went into research, and I was smart and I went into research. And so I'm going to charge $500,000 for a study. So when we first studied the Vibracool device, which is, the same 200 hertz device, but strapped around with a very specific timed ice pack that I calculated the thermal energy so you can't get any kind of frostbite. So when we first did this, the orthopedic surgeon who did the pilot and discovered there was 35% opioid reduction wouldn't publish it unless I gave him $200,000. And he thought he was giving me a deal, because it's usually almost across the board at $500,000. And it's not price fixing. It's just, that's what everybody in orthopedics will charge. I've talked about 12 different docs who were very excited when they thought it was for equity or $500,000, but not interested in just doing independent investigator initiated research. Anyway, so the $200,000, he thought it was lowball. I thought it was abhorrent and unethical. And it turns out it's probably both. But that then causes orthopedic surgeons to be much more expensive to hire. And so that kind of trickles down to cost of hospitals, cost of a lot of things, just because of where prices have been pegged by Medicaid and Medicare for reimbursement. I don't know if any of the changes that happened yesterday are going to change that. I doubt it. But that would be a place where it would make sense. Arlen, would love to know what your thoughts are.
Actually, I have a question. Given the mandatory reduction of indirect costs, given Kennedy where he is, given blah blah blah, what's going to happen, or what is happening?
Very big and different questions, and I'm sure many of the people on the call have a better line of sight than I do. As an investigator, talking to other investigators, I know that many times you have people in academics who are married to other people in academics. So we just got as part of developing the low back pain device, and I am answering your question, it's just circuitous, and it really depends on people. So as part of developing the low back pain device, because our primary outcome was opioid use, I didn't want to do it in a place where there were prescribers on site to risk bias. So we did it at a chiropractor office. And in order to find and to get the data on these wild type opioids, anybody who was using opioids from any source, I had to make an algorithm for data collection. So we made that, and then the NIH wanted to put that into the FDA toolkit for further device investigation. So we got another device, we got another grant for $900,000 to validate the dose opioid source tool that we used for our first study. So the person who is, I was busy, so I got somebody at Hopkins to be co-PI with me, and her husband was with USAID looking at malaria. So he's gotten laid off. And so she is supposed to be executing the study with me at the NIH at Hopkins, looking at post-op pain relief with the device to reduce duration of hospitalization and use the dose tool as part of that. And so her part is delayed because of that. So what I'm saying is, what I see and what I hear from a lot of different investigators is that there are reasons, because of the milieu, beyond their own personal grants or their own personal indirects, but there are reasons why their research has stopped or slowed. We are fortunate in that, apart from the issues with our clinical site, our funding was stopped for 8 days and then it got back up and running. But I know a number of people who now are having to look at moving because of their spouse, or they just don't feel like they can trust the system to hire grad students. So, and of course, obviously, there's a ton of studies which are just being truncated and stopped. So everything that's already put into it is lost. So what's happening is there's a visceral deer in the headlights freeze. You know, there's a lot of fight or flight that is in freeze right now for the people I know in the NIH. You know, there was a stop in recruiting for the studies. And I'm sure all of you know this and have heard it, but if you're going to be on an SRG, if you're going to be on a scientific review group, you get asked about 4 months beforehand. You're going to review for free about 6 to 8 applications that each take about 8 hours. And then you're going to meet, usually virtually. They started in person again recently, but you're going to meet and you're going to discuss this. So there's 20 people around a table. All of you are experts in your field. You're all recruited for specific expertise for these specific grants. And that got stopped because there's a law that you couldn't have these meetings without having the announcement of the meetings. So the initial Kennedy HHS put a freeze on the meetings that were already scheduled, and then put a freeze on the announcements. So the announcements are back up again. But what this means is you can't just get 20 experts to all be able to convene again for 2 days with short notice. So what I understand is that the granting has been delayed. 90% of the granting has been, or they're at 10% of the speed of grant decision making that they were before January.
Is this a percutaneous device, or is it just one?
I was going to ask, do you have something you could show us for us visual types about your prototype, what you're working on, anything?
It would have been a great idea if I'd brought it.
Get a screenshot.
Yeah. So basically, no. All right. I'm gonna back up then. If we're gonna talk about the device, let's talk about back pain first.
I actually, as you do, Mark, you've been patient. You've written 2 things now, specifically about vibrations. Maybe you want to ask that, come off mute.
Yeah, I'm just curious on how the device works and what it does. It's vibrational, so sound.
Yeah, no, it's actually just mechanical. So it turns out that, just as I was alluding to, that neuromodulation, while in 1965 with Melzack and Wall, people started thinking, oh, well, it's electrical. And actually, I could probably pull up a PowerPoint or 2 to show you. But really, the initial pain blocking neuromodulation was done with vibration, and it was found that you had to put it in the same dermatome, but not at the site. And 200 hertz was discovered. This was stuff that was done both in 1960 by Wall and in the late 80s by a guy named Michael Salter, who's still alive, who's at University of Toronto. Great work on why vibration specifically blocks nociceptive pain, turns into adenosine in the dorsal horn, and then it is a presynaptic blocker. So it inhibits the glutamate that is the pain neurotransmitter from getting onto the receptor that's going to take it to the brain. So when we started with this, in the early 80s, there's a guy named Lundeberg in Sweden who made a metal plate that was about 6 by 8 inches. And I will put the link of our website. It's harmonicscientific.com, and that's got pictures of the device, and it's got stuff about how it works. So when I started with this, because of the opioid reduction of the 200 hertz for musculoskeletal pain, I put a couple on Lundeberg's back pain here that had worked better than TENS and was not blocked by naloxone, whereas TENS is blocked by naloxone. So I put a couple of the 200 hertz vibration units so that it could then be, oh, they're very nice, so that it could then go against the low back, and it could transmit the amplitude directly into the low back. And it turns out that the amplitude of 200 hertz was only really helpful for people who had just had an injury, but not as great for chronic. So what we did was, there are a couple things that do work for low back pain. There's heat, there's cold, there's pressure, acupressure, and there are 3 new discoveries about low back pain in the past 5 to 10 years that explain why what we're doing now probably is working. What was effective was slower vibrations. So when we used higher amplitudes and slower vibrations, we got different effects. And particularly when we had them on one plate and they had harmonic interactions. If you've ever seen, if you saw the Lord of the Rings TV series, there's something called a Kolodny plate, which has a whole bunch of vibration that causes, with different frequencies, it causes different niduses of intensity of amplitude. So if you can, different frequencies, you can see different patterns start to move around. And so what we did was we just made 8 different, we started with 12 in the pilot, got it down to 8 different patterns that were giving a full solid metal plate worth of amplitude that covers the whole low back. It's discreet, you can wear it under your clothes, but the thing that is really interesting is that there are piezo ion channels in the muscles and in the cells that respond to pressure. So mechanical force is actually a direct anabolic stimulator. It stimulates growth by having the pressure opens up the channel, ion channel, and most of these ion channels that are force mediated are dealing with growth and repair. So by having a force with vibration, these piezoelectric channels, they're not electric, but these piezo ion channels are on or off. And so if you press them and then press them faster, you can get the effects more quickly. So one of the things, so that's one thing. So one thing that's new is that there are mechanical force related ion channels that are directly related to muscle repair and muscle stimulation. The second thing that's new, this is mostly from a guy named Peter Hodges, who's in New Zealand, Australia. I think he's in Australia. And so what he started finding was that when people have chronic low back pain, that you can't see anything on either there's nothing in the TED talk about the duotherm. It's a good TED talk, but there's nothing in it except for at the very end about the duotherm. So the other thing that Paul Hodges found, and Mainstay Medical has done a really good job of using this information. So 90% of chronic low back pain is you can't see it on an MRI or a CT scan. It's not bony, it's not nerve. And what it is that there are changes in the muscles that stabilize the spine. So those changes then cause the muscles stabilizing the spine to grow, they outgrow their blood supply. There are fatty changes that cause pain from the ceramides that the fat releases. And then because it doesn't have enough blood supply, it ends up getting sticky and the fascia adheres to it. So thing number 2 is that the main cause of acute low back pain is actually these multifidus and erector spinae muscles. So what Mainstay did was they put electrical stimuli into the multifidus muscles, and over about 2 years, they were able to reduce disability from an Oswestry Disability Index of about 65 down to about 55. So, well, crosswalk to a promise score. Anyway, so they were able to reduce that. What we have found in our studies is that by using a whole bunch of these different anabolic frequencies, it's taking about 2 months to get people down to that same disability, which is actually normal. And the third thing that is a new discovery, first published in 2011 by Helene Longovan, who's now running the complementary and alternative NIH Institute, if it still exists. But what she found was that if you look at the shear of the muscles moving, if you've got low back pain, the muscles all move as one. And if you don't have low back pain and you do the same muscle, they all slide. I've got, again, beautiful videos of this. And so the third thing is that fascia pain is probably the biggest part of this mechanical chronic low back pain, because it doesn't have enough blood supply, because the fascia gets stuck. Turns out there are little nubs of acute pain nerves that are stuck in between the fascia and the muscle. So if it's not sliding, every tiny move is tugging on these pain nerves. So one of the other things that makes it move is heat. So by combining heat, which you put behind the metal plate, and these different vibrational frequencies, we're making over time, we're using the ion channels to rehabilitate and to cause growth of the muscles. It turns out 92 hertz inhibits fatty changes, and there's a whole specific range that increases blood flow, and there are some really slower other frequencies that are very narrow, but they inhibit the pro-inflammatory CGRP in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. Anyway, so there's probably 8 different potential ways that these different frequencies are interacting. But what we're seeing is people all of a sudden start moving the same way that people in the multifidus trials do. They go, oh, wow, I feel so loose. So, all right, I've spoken a lot, and I apologize for the jargon for people who are not in medicine. I'm going to put on my readers so I can see if there's comments that I need to respond to.
I'll read them aloud. Most of them are links and such. I'd like to know, where are you in commercialization? Are you on the market? Because I want one.
Yeah, well, so here's the thing, back to all of the regulatory part. So the workers' comp is where most people are going to start. Once you get your 510K, or once you get your de novo or 510K, then you can start selling into workers' comp. And that's where a lot of low back pain issues cost a lot. So they pay an average of $19,000 for a low back strain. And so we pegged the price at $4,900. We started this with an Indiegogo campaign. So we have about 200 of them that have been in circulation for 3 or 4 years now. So we have longitudinal anecdotal evidence on how long, that once you fix the back, it's maintained. We have been selling them as a compassionate use program for $1,500, but I don't want to mess up the FDA. And so I haven't made any claims at all. So the website has 0 claims, and the company that's doing our de novo, I just asked them yesterday, I was like, given everything that's going on, should I just say forget it and say go ahead and just let people buy them ad lib? But we had to buy an MOQ of 1,000 for our clinical trials, and so we have about 600 left. So that's a nebulous answer for your question. Talk to me offline, because I still don't know the right answer. Maybe you guys in the group do. Can I go ahead? We're SGS cleared as a type BF medical device, so we can be on the market as a medical device, and people are buying them. But I don't know. I don't want to jeopardize the fact that we're going up against. We did an integrated analysis compared to the common criteria with the multifidus studies with this implanted electrical probe, and those are the results that I have been writing up, but it's enough. That's the $27,000 procedure. And this is definitely going faster and being a lower end disability.
I'm very, very intrigued by somewhat of a glib comment that you threw in there, and that was, should we just forget about it in light of everything that's going on, and just talk to me about that?
I think that the system for orthopedic and medical device reimbursement is, if not fraught with corruption, it's gotten so Byzantine that it is no longer productive for the goal of helping people.
God bless you. Can I tell you, as a New Yorker, I thought you were just going to say it's so fucked up, but you said corruption and Byzantine and other big words. God bless you, Dr. Amy Baxter.
The only problem with Byzantine is you can't play it for Scrabble because it's too long, but otherwise it'd be a really high point word. But for low point words, the system is broken, and I agree with that. And so the thing is, so I can't, Medicaid, Medicare are already operating with such a tiny overhead, and they have responsibility without authority for appropriations. So I don't see how that system is going to be maintained. And it seems like the rumblings are that Medicaid will be severely truncated. And if it is, then truncal devices like ours are not going to be covered for anybody who's under 65 or whatever the age is. So if that seems like it would be a logical thing. So it seems like it's a writing on the wall, which makes, I think that the huge debate we have in neurotech is, do you go direct to consumer, or do you go through what I've been doing and trying to go through all the medical parts first and get your science out there and then get clinical adoption? I just think that it's too soon to tell, but what's going on now may upend the construct of trying to work through the clinical channels if you have a device that's class 1 that has a demand for it.
One of our 10X alumni is the president of AlphaStim. You must be familiar with their work, and I'm wondering.
Peter Stats or Alpha, which is
You know what? I'm of a certain age now that his name has just left my head.
yeah.
I'll tell you what it is. He's relatively newer. He joined the company 2 years ago. But I'm wondering if all of those devices, TMS and the like, are all going to not get the regulatory support that they need to be able to make the types of claims where they can go ahead and market themselves as aggressively as perhaps a younger Amy Baxter once imagined her device would be.
Yeah, let's take Victoria's question, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit about my experience with the FDA.
Thank you.
Hi. So my question was just, how is this different, or how does it add to somebody that is under chiropractic care, such as my sister? My sister has had back issues for probably 30 years. She worked on the line at Detroit Diesel, which injured her back. And so you're explaining it to me and how it replaces tissue. How long does that take, and the severity of injuries, as far as, because hers has also led to neuropathy and a little bit of MS over the years.
All right, with the caveat that none of this is published, so this is not peer reviewed. We do have there's a pilot. We reduced pain 57%, whether it was chronic or acute, but there was no control. And so the studies we did, the FDA wanted us to do it against an active intervention. So I used a 4-lead prescription 8-channel TENS as my placebo. And we did it in a chiropractor's office. So everybody there was a chiropractic patient. It takes about 2 months to get down to a PROMIS score of 55. So that if you look at pain interference as disability, pain interference, all of those PROMIS scores that are used by the NIH patient-reported outcome measurement system, they're normed on a 50-point scale. So it's called a T-score, but 50 is average for the US or whatever population you're norming against. So 55 is considered to be mild pain, 57.7 is moderate, and 65.7 is severe. So if the people who were at severe, it took them 2 months to get down to a level of 55 on average. And the ones who were more likely, interestingly, the ones who are more likely to get there, we're making a neural network now to try to evaluate who it's really going to work for and who it's not. Car accidents, MVCs, people who had a traumatic incident, those are the ones, and usually it's 10, 15 years ago. Those ones were, they had an extra 5 points of reduction. So I can't answer your question very, I can't answer it well yet because the data is only 160 people and the anecdotal stuff. But it's certainly not going to work if there's something surgical. What the type of people though that work for us are the same ones that multifidus has. So if the mainstay medical do. So if it's like if the worst pain is when they start moving after sitting, like getting up, initiating movement is the hardest. I think those are usually ones where it's an underperfused fascia holding on to all these pain nerves. So the first movement yanks all the pain nerves, and that's where the pain's excruciating. And then standing for a long time, and then there's actually a test you can do pushing on the low back. Those I'm so grateful for what Mainstay has done because they've really made it easy for me to say, okay, well, here's how you distinguish who should be using this device.
You've been at this for how many years now?
Pardon?
You've been working on this device for how many years now?
I've been working on the technology for 20 and the device itself, I guess 10, 26, well, 9, 2016.
I would be curious if I may ask a question. So I had a 14-year-old Labrador Retriever, and she had chronic arthritis, and our vet suggested acupuncture, and she started doing acupuncture, and the results were miraculous. She would run out of that office like, she was fine, and over the next week or 2 or 3, it would, slowly, does this have anything to do with that kind of Chinese medicine based either acupressure, acupuncture, or that same kind of mechanism for pain blocking?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that acupuncture is going to be an adjunct. I think so. One of the things that acupuncture does do is it's highly associated with increased oxytocin. Oxytocin is the regulatory system's, it's the parasympathetic calming safety neurotransmitter.
Mm-hmm.
There are specific frequencies of vibration that enhance oxytocin release. So I think that the final common pathway would be similar, but I think that they're different. I think that they're adjunctive, but it's not what's happening. I think that the thing is, multimodal is multimodal. I think that having multiple different frequencies, I think we're decreasing fatty changes. I think we're having a huge impact on fascia, which is one of the interesting things is some of the people who've got acute and chronic, they've had pain issues in the past, they've gotten epidurals, and then they have a new injury. One of my buddies, I was doing a talk for her at the pediatric sedation conference, and she's a PICU sedationist. She had just torqued her back, pulling this 100-kilo kid off of a CT scanner because she needed to breathe for him for a little bit. And so she was just in such pain. She put the device on, and in about 20 minutes with the device with heat, she went, oh, something changed. Wait a minute. And she did the movement. They all do this movement. She said, something just changed. So that's clearly something mechanical. And this was about 3 years ago. As I was starting to hypothesize and try to figure out why this was working. So I think that particular part of it is fascia, is when the fascia is stuck, that, fascia is called what gums fascia onto muscle is hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid is a thiopectic substance, which means that it's a solid until you jiggle it enough, and then it becomes a liquid, kind of like cornstarch. So I think that part of this is the right frequency that we now know, but I'm not telling anymore because everybody started using my 200 hertz thing. But I think that we got the right frequency to jiggle that hyaluronic acid, and then the heat also does something. So for a certain percentage of people, in our study, it was about 20%, they did have something happen within the first 30 minutes. Also Lundeberg, you know, when he was doing just the single motor against TENS, he had a certain percentage that something happened immediately, and then they were pain-free for a couple weeks. So I think that there are multiple things happening.
Eddie?
Hi, Amy. Yeah, actually, you just touched on my question, which was, what is the duration? Is this something that somebody has to do sort of, you know, daily, or you know, how long does the effect last? And then the other question is, again, much to where one of the earlier questions about the frequency. Is it one size fits all for everyone, has the same magic response at 200 hertz, or is there a range of frequencies that might work for some and not for others?
Yeah, 200 hertz is really just acute, sharp nociceptive pain. 200 hertz is post-op. 200 hertz is needle procedures. 200 hertz was not that great for the low back pain. It was the lower frequencies, and it's also the harmonic interaction. And we're trying to codify this, because I don't want to make the mistakes that a lot of devices do, going out saying it works for everybody, and then it's like, well, you've got to select your patients better. The people who it's worked best for are those who had an injury. It's been in the data, the people who are BMI over 30 and duration of pain greater than a year. And I will add to that the MVC or a trauma. It didn't stay in the model, but it seems like it's more consistent. The people who have had the really quick, oh my gosh, I can move thing, they last between 2 weeks and 2 months, not doing it anymore. But they're like the 15 to 20% minority. For most of the people, the average time for getting down to normal disability was 2 months. And they would use it to start with, like when in the data, they were using it 2 or 3 times a day, and they were usually using it with heat. And then by about a month, most people were not using any temperature at all, and they were using it about twice a day. And what we hear from the people who were in the Indiegogo campaign that use it, they say that once they got it under control, they only need it if something happens, if they torque it again, or some of them are using it first thing in the morning every day. Most of them, they were using it about once or twice a week or less.
Have you thought about sports injuries?
We've got an NFL person. I've certainly thought about sports injuries with the single motor 200 hertz devices. That's Vibracool. They're $65. It's an issue of weight ratios. We can't get the amplitude to penetrate deep enough for most big beefy people. But for the low back, it doesn't seem to matter. Again, we had statistically better outcomes with greater than a year BMI over 30.
I'd like to, I don't know how many folks have to drop at the top of the hour, and I see there are questions. I suspect they're about your device. I'm very interested, because we talked about this in the title of today's talk, for your perspective on NIH, FDA, and where things are going. I'd love to touch on that, and if time allows, we'll come back to Arlen and Andre's questions.
Yeah. So my big concern, and what I have seen happening already, I think that the one change in the NIH that's a good idea is to have the SRGs be central rather than under each institute. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's a good change. I think that the repercussions of very naturally risk-averse academics not wanting to risk, not wanting to put the time in to get grants, I think that's going to be something that is an unforeseen consequence that will be more profound than I think probably any of the restructuring and reorganization. I think there are a number of different organizations like AHRQ, PCORI, not so much. I think that SAMHSA almost should go under that and not NIOSH and OASH. But I think that some of the ways these groups are being pumped together are strange bedfellows, and that's going to make them more inefficient. But the thing about the FDA is that they are so heavily bound to old rules and to precedent that is creaky and not responsive to new science. For example, when we started talking about getting our 510K for the post-op pain, they were very, really focused on, well, we need to have the testing on your hot packs. And I was like, these are commercially available. And like, yeah, but they're going to be, we have an instant hot pack because it has to go through solid. You can't transmit vibration through liquid or gel. It diffuses the amplitude. It doesn't work. So, we spent so many hours fighting about that. And there's no established therapeutic heat that actually works. They have a range 40 to 43 degrees Celsius, but it's not based on real physiology and science. It's just kind of precedent. And on the other side, I was like, look, you've got people that are using devices with an amplitude over 0.3, like the Theragun or Hyperice. You need to be regulating things that are actually going to cause danger with the new understanding of tissue mechanics that we have. And instead, you're stuck on, well, can you prove that it's between 40 and 43 degrees, which is arbitrary and not relevant. So I think that with the FDA, I'm just saying, I think that there is shuffling and work that can be done. The problem is that the way their system is now, this is going to break it. This will crack them open. They cannot, right now, they have to get things done by certain days. And so the people who are assigned to, like our breakthrough application, for example, they have to get a response in 60 days. Okay, well, if they only look at it 3 days before and they realize they need something else and we're not available to talk to them, then they've flagged their account and they freak out. And so that's what I have seen happening. So they say the whole thing about, oh, well, we're not going to have inspectors or reviewers for drugs or medical devices removed with the 3,500 people that they're getting rid of. Yeah, you are. They already have the person who was on our breakthrough lives in New Jersey. So I can't imagine that the process of either moving or finding a new job is not going to slow down everything with that. But my point is, I also think that very new systems need to be implemented there. So I think that losing 3,500 in the FDA is going to absolutely break and delay by easily a year every approval that goes through, just because of the way their system works. They're already so stressed and so undermanned for the way they're doing the task. So hopefully this will mean that the way they do the task has to change.
I saw something today in my LinkedIn feed about how the speaker was projecting that maybe half of medical device VCs will close down soon, because even as it was, the rightfully low percentage that ever make it to IPO or M&A, like 70% just close type of thing. And I can't imagine that. I have to imagine that entrepreneurs like you 10, 20 years ago, who are just starting now, are going to be so discouraged about the likelihood of getting through this morass that it's like, what, just like you said before, should we just,
Well, the one bright point would be if after this, if after a lot of these systems get dismantled, and mind you, I think that the NIH works really beautifully, and I wish that the dedication to science that they have went through the other institutes and through the FDA and CMS. I mean, it's ludicrous to have the best and the brightest in our country rule on science by deciding to give it a grant, having spent all of this time reviewing it, with battling it out with 20 other people around a table, and then having it through the filter of the scientists who are doing it, and then not use that information anymore, no longer accept that we've already looked at the safety and we've looked at so many of these things. Now you're replicating this with the FDA then saying, we're not sure this temperature is safe, or just prove it. We think it is, but you have to test it to prove it. And then having CMS say, well, we don't even think it's really science, we think it's distraction, when you've already got the best minds evaluating it. So I think that trying to move that more linearly so that they're not housed in different places, I think that would be one benefit. And the other thing is, truly, if the administration wants to move more toward non-drug certainly non-opioid and more physiologic health-based solutions, then that's devices. You know, that's going to be devices all day long. So if we're really moving to physics medicine instead of chemistry medicine, then it will be then devices and young people getting into devices are going to have a benefit if money follows those mandates. And that's the part that remains to be seen. Are they going to break it down first and then put money in, just like the HEAL grant that Francis Collins took the money and put it into a grant? Now we're seeing 10 years later, now we're seeing the results of what the money does to promote devices to reduce opioids.
Nikki, I'm wondering, at a place, I wouldn't ask you to comment on behalf of Boston Scientific, but perhaps in the conversations that you have, what are you hearing in terms of changes being brought by the new administration and how it relates to either big businesses like yours or perhaps some startups and smaller companies that you talk to on the side?
On the big side, on the Boston side, I've heard surprisingly little. You know, a big company like Boston Scientific, we get little newsletters and things from corporate and, you know,
Little newsletters,
yeah,
Biffle, whatever.
but you know, it's a 50,000 person company and there's people that are looking at 60,000 foot level things and all the way down. And for us, generally speaking, I think it's business as usual. We just keep going. There's a change in the administration. RFK Jr. is going to let go, whatever the news was yesterday, 10,000 people or whatever. We'll see what Dr. Oz does with the agency. But generally speaking, we just keep going. And you know, I don't mean to sound flippant when I say it's business as usual. You know, we are aware, of course, that Washington, D.C. has been turned on its head and things like that. But generally speaking, we just keep going. I'm booking a meeting any day now with CMS. I have some things I need to talk to them about, and we just keep going. That's not to say that behind the scenes there's not upheaval and things like that, but and to Amy's point, it's different in orthopedics. You know, that might be a different upheaval from where I am in vasculature. But yeah, we just keep going.
And the smaller ones?
Nothing. I haven't heard anything from consulting clients or anything like that where they're upset. I get asked questions, but to that point again, Joe, it's like, just keep going, submit your 510K, submit this CMS recommendation. Sorry, Joe?
I said that's more encouraging than what I thought you were going to say.
Yeah.
I think Marty Macri, I really I respect him. We're on different sides of COVID vaccination, but otherwise, I really think he is super smart and has looked at these issues for a long time. So I'm actually happy that he is going to be heading up FDA. I think if anybody's going to be able to look at reforming systems to be more efficient, I think he will. I thought my husband just brought me, this is what the Vibracool ice packs look like. And so the thermal energy cannot cause frostbite even in a baby, but it will melt in 20 minutes. So it's a good icing time. This is the knee device. And so it's got the 200 Hertz device in it and the motor is right there. So sorry for interrupting, but just I meant to have props and I didn't.
No, it's all good. And I showed some things on the website. So if folks on the call, I read a comment or two, want to potentially buy one of your devices, they can do so on the website or they cannot?
They need to talk to me to get I think the code is AMA 2024. If you want to get it at 1500, then you need to put the code in, because otherwise we have it on the price that we're going at it for CMS, which is 4900, because we are up against the $27,000 multifidus surgery. So that said, though, I mean, pain doctors get $10,000 for putting the little doodles in, and it takes 15 minutes. So pain doctors are probably not going to be super stoked to change their practice. But yeah, again, it's you know, I don't know. Arlen probably knows. I should talk to him. or I'm waiting to hear what our people say in terms of whether or not I should just go ahead and put the claims that we've got supported in the literature that's already published, and then add the stuff once these new ones get published.
Maybe we can invite you back in a year and see how you navigated it and what you decided.
Sure, it's just it's a 5-hour time difference to Portugal most of the time.
Will you be living there by then?
Yeah, it should be. I'm actually speaking at, there's a Harvard PM&R conference in June 5th. They have a research day, and so they have 3 speakers talking about new physiology of recuperation. So I'm talking about the force-gated proteins and repair, and I'm talking about multifidus, I'm talking about fascia, I'm talking about different frequencies for inflammation, for blood flow and vasodilation. So I don't know, I can give you that to share, Joe, with, but if anybody's around Boston, that's where I'm gonna spill the tea on a lot of this. And I also did a brain mind talk June 1st that I put a lot of what the physiology of what we're doing is. So yes,
I'm so
I'm happy
glad
to talk to you in a year.
I'm so glad I persisted and got you to join us today. What a treat. Thank you so much.
You have just helped all of us when we're, back before we were self-sustaining. It was such a blessing to know that you had answers that I didn't have to pay somebody $1,200 an hour to find out. And you were willing to talk and you were willing to share. So I appreciate what you've done for the entire industry.
That's very, very kind. Thank you. Sean, who do we have next week? George is going to talk to us about.
Yeah, George is going to talk to us. George is incredible. He's like 24 years old, and figures he's an oldest child. And he has a startup that is taking all sorts of data from the FDA, particularly around warning letters. And he's going to talk to us about warning letters. And he's done this amazing analysis of the warning letters and what can be learned from warning letters in both in the aggregate and in the specific. And so he's developing a platform with a startup partner on like what do we do with all this data. And so there are really interesting things happening with data, and real world evidence and that sort of thing that people are. I met him, I was just like, wow, this is like 24 years old. Like what I was doing at 24 years old was.
We should not talk about that on this call. It's for
I
public.
should not talk about it on this call, right? It did not look anything like,
He sounds
having
impressive. I mean, he's not going to be an Amy Baxter, but you can't Amy Baxter every week, or else where do you go from there?
I mean, you underestimate. He's got 31 years to get where I am. So,
but he's
In Portugal?
well, no, just to be 55.
Okay, right. Well, we'll stop there. Thanks, friends, for joining. Amy, great to see you, and we'll keep in touch. God bless
Can
everyone.
you leave it open for 1 second for me to answer a question from Arlen? If he's
By all means. Oh, well, Arlen has left the call, but
I
it's
will.
recorded if you want. Okay, we'll say goodbye.
Okay. All right.
Goodbye, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank Carrie.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I hope that I hope you're not being frauded upon.
Oh, I was. Yeah.
Did you?
That card is canceled.
Oh, good. Or bad. I mean, it's a pain in the butt, but at least handled.
I'll get a new card.
All right.
Yeah.
Can you leave it on for a second just so I can see what people were asking?
Sure.
'Cause I didn't.
Actually, I can send you the text file.
Oh, perfect. That'd be great.
Let me just figure out how I can webinar chat. Let's see. I think when I end the call, I get the webinar chat sent to me, and then what happened is I will copy that into an email and send it to you. So if you just give me your email, and you can just put that in the chat. And I will forward
All right, there you go.
the chat file to you, and you'll have everything.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a
Bye.
good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Too.